Agnes's little piece of paradise. Agnes Gable considered her garden her little piece of paradise. It wasn't manicured like the other lawns in the subdivision, each blade of grass standing at attention, identical in height and shade. No, Agnes's garden was a riot of color and texture, a whimsical explosion of life that defied the HOA's rigid expectations. Lavender bushes spilled onto the sidewalk, their fragrant purple blossoms buzzing with happy bees. Scarlet poppies bobbed their heads amongst the unruly rosemary, and plump tomatoes ripened on vines that dared to climb the white picket fence. Every morning, Agnes would shuffle out in her gardening clogs, a worn straw hat perched atop her head. The first thing she did was greet her plants. A soft murmur of "Good morning, darlings," escaping her lips. She'd check for snails feasting on her prize-winning petunias, gently pluck off any yellowing leaves, and water each plant with a watering can that had seen better days but held sentimental value. It was a ritual, a quiet communion with the earth that grounded her. But lately, the peace had been disturbed. A crisp, white envelope, bearing the HOA logo, had become a recurring fixture in her mailbox. Notice of violation, they declared in bold, impersonal letters. The reasons varied, but the underlying message was always the same. Her garden was not up to code. Unruly vegetation. One notice had stated, "Failure to maintain uniform appearance," another had complained. Agnes sighed, the scent of roses doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. She knew they were coming. They always did. And each time her heart clenched a little tighter, her little piece of paradise feeling a little less like her own. The letter. The crisp, officious envelope felt like a slap in the face. Agnes recognized the embossed logo of the Harmony Oaks Homeowners Association instantly. Her stomach churned. It was heavier than usual, probably containing photographic evidence of her transgressions. She carried it inside, the late afternoon sun glinting off the pristine white paper, mocking her. Sitting at her kitchen table, she hesitated, the unopened letter a physical weight in her hand. Finally, she tore it open. The letter was as cold and impersonal as she'd expected. Notice of noncompliance, it declared in bold, underlined font. Her lavender bushes apparently were exceeding the approved height by a full 6 inches. The creeping thyme spilling over the edge of her brick walkway was deemed unsightly ground cover. And the bird feeder? A haven for undesirable avian species, attracting squirrels and, God forbid, pigeons. Each point was meticulously detailed, followed by a chilling paragraph outlining potential fines that would accrue daily until the violations were rectified. Agnes felt a wave of nausea. Fines. She pictured her meticulously saved egg money slowly dwindling, vanishing into the HOA's coffers. Her gaze drifted towards the window, to her garden, her sanctuary. The lavender hummed with bees, the thyme released its peppery scent with every gentle breeze, and the bird feeder, well, the birds were singing their hearts out. Could she really bring herself to prune, to rip, to conform? The thought made her hands tremble. This wasn't just about a garden, it was about control, about the slow erosion of everything she held dear. Stern's inspection. Arthur Stern adjusted his tie, the knot a precisely symmetrical triangle against his starched white shirt. He checked his reflection in the polished silver teapot, the faint distortion only amplifying his already severe expression. Today was Agnes Plumtree's day of reckoning. He retrieved his clipboard from the hall table, its surface worn smooth from years of tyrannical note-taking. The violations column was pre-populated with suspected overgrowth and unapproved floral arrangement. Stern relished these inspections. Not because he enjoyed Agnes's inevitable sputtering protests, but because maintaining order was paramount. Anarchy started with a rogue petunia. Stern believed in rules. They were the girders holding civilization upright, preventing the descent into the chaotic mess his own life had become after his early retirement. His wife, bless her departed soul, used to call him a control freak. Now, the HOA was his domain, a miniature kingdom of perfectly manicured lawns and uniformly painted fences. Let the rest of the world crumble, Harmony Glade would remain pristine, thanks to him. He smoothed down the non-existent wrinkles on his tweed jacket, grabbed his trusty metal measuring tape, and marched out the door, the crisp click of his leather shoes echoing his grim determination. Agnes Plumtree was about to learn that Arthur Stern didn't just write the rules, he enforced them. And he enjoyed doing it. A Marine returns. The wilting heads of her prize-winning roses drooped like scolded children. Agnes crumpled another HOA violation notice in her gloved hand. Noxious weeds exceeding acceptable height, it read, the sterile language of Barb in her already tender heart. Weeds. She considered the rebellious sprigs of wildflowers she'd allowed to flourish, defiant splashes of color against the manicured lawns of suburbia. They were beautiful. A truck rumbled to a stop at the curb. Agnes barely registered it, lost in her battle with creeping despair. The gate creaked open. "Mom!" Agnes straightened, her back protesting. The sun blurred the figure standing there, impossibly tall against the azure sky. Then the figure moved and the sun glinted off a close-cropped haircut. A duffel bag thumped to the ground. "Jake?" Her voice was a rusty hinge. He grinned, the familiar crinkling around his eyes chasing away years of worried lines on Agnes' face. The one and only. Surprise! She rushed forward, the gardening gloves forgotten, and threw her arms around him. He smelled of sun-baked canvas and something indefinably marine. Safe. He hugged her back, a bear crushing a dandelion. "What are you doing here? I thought you were." "Had some leave saved up," he said, releasing her but keeping his hands on her shoulders. "Needed to check on my best girl. And maybe," he winked, glancing at the scattered papers, "handle a few pests." His gaze lingered on the offending notices, a silent promise flickering in his eyes. Agnes knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside out, the weeds were the least of the HOA's worries now. The HOA arrives. The late afternoon sun cast long, judgmental shadows as Arthur Stern, flanked by Mrs. Higgins and Mr. Peterson, marched towards Agnes's defiant jungle. Stern adjusted his tie, a navy blue power statement he usually reserved for board meetings. The air, thick with the scent of untamed roses and something vaguely fungal, assaulted his senses. He clutched the violation notice, its pristine white a stark contrast to the riot of color spilling from Agnes's yard. He rapped sharply on the door, the sound swallowed by the verdant chaos. After an uncomfortably long pause, the door swung inward, revealing not the frail, apologetic Agnes he'd anticipated, but a man. A large man. Stern recoiled slightly, the violation notice trembling in his grasp. The man filled the doorway, his shoulders impossibly broad, his gaze direct and assessing. He wore a faded t-shirt that strained against his biceps, and his jaw was set in a way that suggested he wasn't easily intimidated. "This wasn't Agnes. Can I help you?" The man's voice was a low rumble, a stark contrast to Agnes's usual bird-like chirp. Stern cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "I'm Arthur Stern, president of the Homeowners Association. We're here to..." He trailed off, suddenly feeling the weight of Mrs. Higgins's expectant stare and Mr. Peterson's nervous cough. He swallowed. "We have some concerns regarding the upkeep of the property." The man raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Concerns?" He glanced at the well-manicured lawns across the street, then back at Stern. "Seems pretty lively to me. Violations and joy." Stern adjusted his tie, the knot feeling suddenly too tight. He cleared his throat. "Agnes, with all due respect, there are certain discrepancies. Section 3, subsection B, paragraph 7 clearly states that hedges must be trimmed to a maximum height of 3 feet. Yours are, well, considerably taller." He gestured vaguely at the riot of rose bushes spilling over the low stone wall. Jake leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. "They're attracting hummingbirds, sir. And the butterflies are loving the lavender." Stern's face reddened. "And the petunias." Paragraph 12, subsection D, specifically prohibits petunias in window boxes. They're considered common. He pointed a trembling finger at the overflowing boxes bursting with vibrant purple and pink. "Common maybe, but they're bringing joy to the kids who walk by on their way to school," Jake said softly. "They stop and smell them every morning. Even saw a little girl leave a drawing of one tucked in the dirt the other day." Stern huffed. "And the sunflowers. Gross violation. They exceed the height restriction for flowering plants by at least 6 feet." He pointed to the towering stalks, their faces tilted towards the sun. "They're also attracting squirrels." Jake smiled. "Yeah, they are. The kids named them. That one's Nutsy. The little one is Pip." He watched as a squirrel scampered up one of the stalks. "Seems to me they're adding a bit of life to the place, sir. A bit of beauty." Stern sputtered, his meticulously crafted arguments deflating in the face of Jake's quiet defiance. He looked around, really looked at the garden, at the buzzing bees, the vibrant colors, the sheer exuberance of it all. He hated to admit it, but it was beautiful. And the thought of the little girl leaving a drawing, it tugged at something deep down, the children's chorus. The shouting match had drawn a crowd. Not the kind Agnes expected. Not neighbors eager to take sides, but children. They peeked through the gaps in the overgrown hedge, their faces alight with curiosity. Then, bolder ones recognizing the source of the color that splashed onto the street, pushed their way through. Mrs. Nowak's flowers, a little girl with pigtails, squealed, pointing a chubby finger at the sunflowers towering over the fence. Soon, a small chorus of voices rose above the legal jargon. Stern was sputtering. "The butterflies are so pretty. I saw a hummingbird yesterday. Can we pick some?" Stern, his face reddening, tried to maintain his composure. He adjusted his tie, its silk suddenly feeling too tight. These weren't the arguments he'd prepared for. He'd anticipated property values, aesthetic uniformity, bylaws cited with precision. He had not anticipated children. A small boy, no older than 5, offered Agnes a dandelion he'd plucked from the lawn. "For you, Mrs. Nowak. Because your garden is the best." The boy's earnest expression, the simple sincerity of the gesture, seemed to deflate Stern's puffed-up chest. He glanced around at the other children, their faces open and joyful, reflecting the vibrant colors of Agnes's defiant garden. A seed of doubt, small but persistent, began to sprout within him. Was he really doing the right thing? Were these flowers truly a menace, or something far more precious? A marine's compromise. Jake leaned against the wrought iron gate, the setting sun glinting off his close-cropped hair. "Mr. Stern," he said, his voice calm but firm, "my mother loves her garden. It's her sanctuary. But I also understand the need for some order. How about this? I'll spend a couple of hours each week trimming back the obvious offenders. A little shaping, a little tidying. Enough to satisfy the HOA without gutting the soul of the place." Agnes, who had been hovering by the porch, her face etched with worry, shuffled forward. "Jake, are you sure? I don't want you to." "Mom, trust me on this one," he said, his eyes holding hers. "It's a compromise. We give a little, they give a little. It's how things work." She nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. Stern swallowed, the knot in his tie feeling tighter than ever. He'd expected resistance, maybe tears, certainly not a negotiation led by a former Marine. He glanced at Mrs. Henderson, whose prune-like face usually mirrored his own outrage at any deviation from HOA standards, but she was now regarding Jake with something akin to admiration. He could feel his carefully constructed authority crumbling. "Well," he stammered, pushing his glasses up his nose, "I suppose a little trimming to bring it into compliance." The fight had gone out of him. The scent of honeysuckle hung heavy in the air, almost mocking his defeat. Peace in the garden. Stern swallowed, the knot in his tie feeling tighter than usual. Jake's sheer presence, not to mention the glint in his eye when Agnes had mentioned creative interpretation of the bylaws, had effectively neutered his authority. "Right," he conceded, his voice a strained rasp. A compromise. Perhaps some judicious trimming. That would be acceptable." Agnes beamed, the worry lines around her eyes softening. "Wonderful." Jake's promised to help. The following Saturday, the air buzzed with the drone of Jake's electric trimmer, a stark contrast to the usual chirping of birds. Agnes, in her floral apron, directed operations with the precision of a seasoned general. Jake, surprisingly adept, sculpted the overflowing bougainvillea into manageable, albeit vibrant, hedges. He tamed the riotous roses, training them to climb the trellis in a more disciplined fashion. The result was a garden that still screamed Agnes, but with a slightly quieter voice. The explosion of color remained, but the edges were cleaner, the pathways more defined. Sunflowers still stood tall, but they no longer threatened to topple onto the sidewalk. A week later, Stern walked past, clipboard clutched nervously in his hand. He paused, squinting at the garden. He couldn't deny the improvement. It was charming. The vibrant hues of petunias spilled from hanging baskets, now neatly arranged, and the aroma of lavender drifted on the breeze. He even noticed a couple strolling along the sidewalk, pausing to admire the blooms. A grudging smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps order and beauty weren't mutually exclusive after all. He made a note, Gable residence, compliance, satisfactory with minor aesthetic reservations.